prevent students who attend meetings within a school of the proper procedures to evacuate a building in an orderly and timely manner in the event of a fire emergency. If you must evacuate this room because of an emergency, please exit through the door located in the rear. Turn right and proceed through the doors that exit directly to the parking lot. Okay, can I have a motion to waive the 24-hour rule?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Clark, second by Mrs. Curran. The Board of Education. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The Board of Education nominates Susan Bertram for the position of Area 11 Director for the New York State School Boards Association.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Clark. Second? Second by Mrs. Curran. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, the purpose of this meeting this evening is to talk about procedures regarding fundraising by community groups. There's been a lot of interest, of course, in how we can fundraise to help support the programs that we'll be losing under the tax cap. And we've invited our counsel, this is Chris Benator, and were we supposed to have the auditor here? Okay. So, do we want to start with a discussion of fundraising, or do we want to go straight to?
Could I mention two
Yes,
things?
sure.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
what I'm saying.
As I was thinking about this and looking at what we have in terms of our existing policies, we have very good control over the internal parts of fundraising and so forth. But we don't really have a comprehensive policy regarding external fundraising. And of course, we've never really had a reason to have one, but now obviously is the time. I think there are four things to keep in mind as we have a discussion here tonight. One of them is control. The board certainly can't give up its fiduciary control or its policy controls over programs and the funds that support those programs. Another thing the board needs to consider is equity. You will get requests from different groups to fund this and fund that, and one of the things the board will need to be concerned about is how we approach this in an equitable fashion. And then there are certainly going to be priorities, and I think the board will have to spend some time discussing really what are the priorities, as far as bringing programs back that are externally funded. And finally, a big issue, but not one that is always on our minds, is timing. A lot of the things that we have lost in the course of the budget process are things that require a lot of lead time for fundraising. And you can't commit yourself to doing something before you have the money to do it. So that means that there is some need for speed here in terms of developing policies, procedures for what we do, so the groups that are interested in fundraising for certain things have enough time to accomplish that purpose, amass the amount of money that's needed to support a program and to move forward with it and get it on the calendar, because calendar is another sometimes difficult issue, because our calendar dates fill up fast, and that doesn't leave too much room for juggling, as Christina can tell you. So those are just some things to keep in mind as we have our discussions tonight.
I assume when you say calendar dates, you're not just talking about the Baldwin calendar. You're talking about calendar dates in term, for example, for interscholastic sports.
Right.
That is a calendar we don't really have much control over, do we?
No, we don't, and that's one of those items that requires a lot of lead time.
So we have, is it, for middle school sports, is that still through Section 8?
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Yeah.
And at what point do we have to get a date in?
It depends on the sport, because there are different seasons, but you have to have enough lead time to, first of all, let Section 8 know that we are participating. And then, of course, we do know what each event costs the school district. So, or each program costs the school district. So that information is readily available and can be given at any time. But if you're going to schedule something like a high school musical, for example, the amount of time that is needed to get the rights to perform the musical and to organize the stage crews and so forth is several months. So that's just an example of timing.
Do you
But
want to talk a little bit about Section 8? In case
I was just gonna
people
say
jump in?
that, let's get back to the Section 8 stuff for a minute. For the middle school sports, for example, let's say for the fall sports, is that already out of the question?
That's a difficult question to answer. We're not going to be on the schedule because we cut those sports. That doesn't mean we can't go back on the schedule if we were to notify them. The wrinkle probably is that you have to have the money to do it. And in order for the fundraising to take place, I would say for fall, it's going to be very difficult.
Can I just weigh in, just give me some?
Yes, of course.
There is, in terms of fundraising, there's not a lot of guidance in terms of decisions of the Commissioner of Education, but there's one main case that does talk about sports in particular and fundraising. And essentially what that case, the proposition that case stands for is that members of the community are able to fundraise and provide a donation to the district, which the district, the Board of Education will have to accept. And it is looked upon by season. So the fall season, in order to have the fall season, you would need the entirety of the cost of the program in by a certain date, probably, I would imagine sometime in early August. So let's say the cost is $100,000, I'm just throwing a number out. You would need that full $100,000 before the season starts in order to have a fall season. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that when the commissioner talked about accepting monies for sports programs, the commissioner talked about it in terms of accepting monies for the entire program. In other words, the middle school fall sports program would consist of their certain amount of boys teams and a certain amount of girls teams. And I do not think that you could accept donation and have part of a program, because there are Title IX concerns in terms of you have boys programs, you have girls programs. So the guidance that we have to date from SED and the commissioner is that if you're going to have a sports program, you look at it season by season, and you need to have the entire season. Query whether or not you could have a partial season, only some sports and not others. I don't know if there's any authority for that, nor do I think that you want to get into the business of picking and choosing, which sports you're going to have and you're not going to have. So just want to say one other point about fundraising. Now, fundraising typically is done, it's not really a Board of Education or a district function, it's a community function where the community gets together through various groups, whether it's you have a booster club or other organizations, or you create organizations within the community, and you fundraise and then you donate monies to the district. There are lots of communities not too far from here that have been fairly successful over the years in coming up with fairly large sums of money, particularly for sports. You followed last year, Seafood School District, they didn't have middle school sports. They did it season by season. By the time they got to the spring season, they didn't have all the money that they needed to have a spring season, so they had an intramural program. The Wanto School District 3 or 4 years ago, their booster club raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. Plain Edge over the years, that community has been very successful through community organization in raising money to fund the sports program. So it can be done. It's difficult when economic times are hard, which I would think that these are difficult economic times, so people are not necessarily as willing to give, but it's helpful to approach businesses, and really encourage businesses to donate money. I would encourage you to do that. But so if you are looking at it in terms of sports, you need to look at it season by season, and you need to have the entire cost for that season up front before the season starts. And I'm sure Section 8 will give you a deadline in terms of when you would have to notify them whether or not you're in, because then they got to schedule games, all that sort of thing. So it is done season by season.
Just to be clear, so a community group couldn't say, you know, my kid's in lacrosse and I really like that program, so I'd like to, you know, fundraise for lacrosse. That is not really the way it's done.
It's
really
not,
done
yeah,
for the
in
whole-
terms of the guidance that we have so far, the
Yes.
commissioner, the way, you know, that case particularly went down, it's talking about season by season, having the whole season or none of the season. Because again, you got Title IX concerns, it's got lacrosse, is that girls' team, is that boys' team, if it's just a boys' team or just a girls' team, then you have those legal issues that are problematic, so it's really best to look at it season by season and then have the full complement of the boys' teams and the girls' teams for that season or you don't have it.
And that's where I was going with the equity issue.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Chris, you brought up the issue of getting businesses to sponsor something, whether it be a sport or whether it be the play. What are the restrictions on that? For instance, if you could get a local business, let's say the Coral House, to sponsor the play, what are the restrictions on something like that? And what about selling, going even further, and let's say Coca-Cola kind of thing, or a local bank? How does that play out?
Well, you can encourage businesses, Coral House, or Coca-Cola, or any type of business entity, to donate to the school, and they can donate for a particular program. They say, we're gonna donate $10,000 to have X event or program, and this is earmarked for that, and then you would have to, if that's the way it's couched, if you accept it, you have to then accept it for that person. You have the right to earmark it, you have to accept it for that person, just like sports. If a booster club is gonna donate $100,000, you'd have to 8th and 9th grade, or 7th and 8th grade middle school sports program in the fall, you gotta use that money for the middle school sports program. So local business can do that. What typically happens when a business is willing to donate money, there typically is a quid pro quo. In other words, business typically will say, you know, I want some name recognition for the fact that I'm donating $10,000. And you know, there are some things that you can and cannot do in terms of name recognition that you can provide to an entity that has donated money. And it goes, you know, back to regulations of the Commissioner of Education, which prohibit, you know, the commercialization of school property or endorsing different products and businesses. So, you know, there's a fine line that you have to follow in terms of how much you can acknowledge a business for its donation. So you are permitted to acknowledge a business for donating to the schools, and there's various ways you can do it, you know, announcements at public board meetings, etc. But you can't, you know, advertise Coca-Cola or on your, you know, district letterhead or you know, your different things that go out on a monthly basis. So the things that you can do and the things you can't do. So when you get to that point, and those entities are suggesting that, you know, they're willing to donate money to the Baldwin School District, but this is what they want, then, you know, you review with us and we can go through what we can and cannot do. I mean, for instance, a common one that you see all the time, what you used to see all the time, Coca-Cola or et cetera, would donate a scoreboard, you know, for an athletic field. And you would be permitted on this gigantic scoreboard to put somewhere on there, scoreboard donated by Coca-Cola. That's permitted. You can't, that we call signage, can't dominate the scoreboard, but it can be tactful someplace, you know, in there. Well, we don't have.
Something like on a program, for a theater program, you know, such and such presents whatever the play is?
Well, not presents, but
Sponsored
by, or
Underwritten or
or
thanks to the donation. of-
donations of by someone's of Coral House, help put on the
Right.
show. We gotta look at it and just make sure it's tasteful and it doesn't, it's a fine line between
Yeah,
recognizing a donation and endorsing a product.
right.
So we gotta make sure we stay on that line.
Okay, what happens if, let's say we get a corporate donation and the program, let's pick a number, it costs $100,000. and we get a corporate donation for 50,000 and the community raises another 40, but we don't have enough for the whole thing.
You mean for a sports season, for instance?
Well, whatever, let's pick something. We don't, the community doesn't get enough. What happens to the money they did raise?
Well, and that's a good question, and I know they experienced that in Seaford this past year, where they weren't able, it was actually last year, they weren't able to get the amount of money that they needed, and so let's say they needed 50,000, and this community group, you know, they were doing car washes and other sorts of things where it's really difficult to document, this person gave 50, this person gave 25, it's cash, so it's really hard to keep track of that. So now they needed 50, they only came up with 25, and they ended up, instead of having that sports program where they had all interscholastic teams, they instead used it for having the intramural program, which they could, you know, spend $25,000 and have an intramural program. So that's the difficulty if you're an outside group and you got a goal in mind. If you don't achieve that goal, you're not going to be able to, you know, fund the 7th and 8th grade sports program. So you may have to use that money for something else. Donate it for some other purpose.
So do you have to set that up in advance? Let's say the group, be it boosters or whomever, that's raising the money. If they're gonna take your money, you, community member, do they have to say, if we don't get enough, this is what it's going to be used for? I mean, legally.
I don't think legally they have to. I think it's advisable so people know. Like in the Seaford School District, I mean, they fully anticipated for that season, they were gonna get the full complement of money, so they didn't tell people, if you don't get 50,000, this is what we're gonna do. They didn't know what they were gonna do, and they fully anticipated that they were gonna get the 50,000. When they didn't get it, then they donated to have an intramural program to service as many kids as they could. I think it is advisable that there's a group that's gonna undertake to reach these goals, that they have to recognize that it's possible that they may not meet that goal. And if that's the case, and they can't have the 7th and 8th grade sports program, what the contingency is, what they would donate, whatever they had for. I mean, I think that would be helpful, but I don't think there's any legal requirements associated with that.
Are we allowed to use any outside organizations to fundraise?
When you say outside,
Outside groups, for instance, the organization, the name you gave me last week, what was it, the Baldwin Foundation?
Okay, that's a different question. Baldwin Foundation, okay, let's have you answer this. We have a foundation in this community,
okay.
the Baldwin Foundation for Education. They already have a structure for donating.
Okay.
They wouldn't, the reason they wouldn't be doing the fundraising. In theory, could they be used as the conduit?
I don't see why they couldn't be the conduit of collecting money, and then when the money they collected, to donate to the Baldwin School District, and the Baldwin School District can accept that donation
From the
that
foundation.
Yes.
Okay, but they wouldn't do the fundraising, is my point. It would have to be the boosters or another group. I mean, the foundation wouldn't do the fundraising per se.
No, what kind of foundation, is it an educational foundation?
Yeah.
It's a 501c3?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why they couldn't fundraise on their own. They're separate apart from the Baldwin School District. They're separate entities.
They're
They have their own bylaws.
So if that's consistent with their bylaws in terms of what they're permitted to do, I don't know why they couldn't fundraise, and then whatever money they get, then donate it to the Baldwin.
But
School
if another organization in town wanted to fundraise, instead of that organization having to set up its own 501.
Yes,
They could
can use that
use
that structure
that
so they don't have to
theoretically
separately go ahead and
as
file.
a conduit for,
Mhm. Sure.
yeah.
As long as the Educational Foundation was on board and, you know,
Right.
Right.
they set that up, sure, I don't see why not.
Chris, that would be between the
Yeah, that's
VFE
that.
and what other,
Yes.
whatever other groups want to
Right.
fundraise.
I think it's important, that, you know, that the community understands that in large measure, these fundraising activities, the community's gonna have to take the lion's share of the lead on that. I mean, you could give them advice and assistance, but ultimately, the role of the board is to accept donations, and it's gonna be the responsibility to choose to accept
So
as a
there are
community.
clear legal limits for board members in terms of fundraising? Can we go out with our tin cup and ask for money, or is that
Well,
not?
as a board member, you're also a member of the community. You
Right.
don't lose your right to be a community member, so even though you're sitting as a board member, you're also a member of the community. So you, like any other community member, can go out there and fundraise, and whatever organization is taking the lead can then sponsor that money to the board.
Okay,
But the board's role is really to accept
Yeah, right.
donation.
as a board member, that would be our role.
That's your role.
I have two questions for you. First of all, if a particular group doesn't fundraise the amount they need, then whose decision is it how that money's used? Is it the board or the group that raised it?
Well, however much money they have, they're gonna donate. If they've got enough for the fall 7th and 9th grade season, and they're gonna set forth that we're donating 25,000, if they donate it specifically for that person, for that purpose, if you're gonna accept a donation, you gotta use it for that purpose. I mean, it could be an open-end donation. If you're a donation, we're just donating X amount of dollars to the Baldwin School District, then you can use it as you see fit.
Right, no, but I mean, if they say, let's say it's the sports group that raises, like the example we used before, the 25,000 instead of 50. Of course, it'd be used to sports, but then we would decide how it would be used.
Yeah, I mean, you would have to set up an intramural program if that's what you chose to do, and try to service as many kids as possible.
And the second question is, are we allowed to allow use of buildings and equipment and staff to fundraise to an outside group?
You're talking about on district time, it's clearly not. You know, employees can't, while they're being paid as an employee, have any involvement in fundraising. No, that's not a legitimate use of employee time.
I have a question that I'm not really clear about. Let's say a community group fundraises for the fall season of sports. Okay, I'm not a big sports person, so
Okay.
just want to get this right. Okay, so they decide to fundraise for this, and the entire cost of the program is 50, and they make 40, right? So they can't use it for that. However, if they've donated for that, can we then use that money for the spring season? Like, does it have to be, it's sports, does it have to be for a specific season?
Well, if you want to have that particular season, the answer, you would.
Right, but we don't have enough for that season, so
You
now
don't
we
have
have
enough.
40.
Typically what happens is, and this happens, you have dialogue with that outside organization.
Oh,
And
okay.
there's typically dialogue going back and forth, and you get close, and they'll say, listen, we're not gonna make our goal of 50, we got 40. So typically the dialogue would be, well, we can either have an intramural program, give us 25 of it, keep 15, and start working towards the winter season.
Mhm.
So you kind of had that dialogue. Even though your role is to accept, I mean, there's a community of interest involved, and you had that dialogue to work together and trying to determine what's best and how do you service the most number of kids. So it's a collaborative effort in that regard, but ultimately it's the organization that determines whether or not they're gonna give you 25 grand to have an intramural program, or whether they're gonna hold that money back and donate it when they have enough money for winter season or for spring season.
Okay.
So that dialogue can absolutely continue.
Because the money, until such times it's turned over to the school district, remains in their hands.
In their hands, right?
So they're not gonna hand it over $1,000 at a
No,
time.
no, no, no.
So
They're gonna hold
wait
on
until
to
they
it.
have the
They're gonna hold
pool.
on to it, they have all the money.
Right.
They're not gonna start giving you money piecemeal.
Okay, another question. One of our policies says, all such gifts, meaning from outside groups, once approved, become the property of the Baldwin Union Free School District, which has sole discretion over the disposition of gifted items. We really lean very heavily on that policy to say, if you donate a flat screen TV at Plaza School, there's no guarantee it will stay at Plaza School. It becomes our property, we can put it where we think would be most appropriate. However, when a community group fundraises, obviously, they want to fundraise for specific items.
Right.
How do you,
I think you have to be very clear and honest with that community group, and if you're gonna honor their intent, then you tell them. If you feel like you can't honor their intent, then you gotta tell them also.
okay,
So you're very upfront. If the position is, you know what, you donate money, we decide where it's gonna go, you gotta let them know that. Because most groups, if you really want to get them to put in the type of effort that's gonna take to get that much money, they need to know that they're donating for 7th and 8th sports, and they have that money, it's gonna go to 7th and 8th grade sports, and you want them to put in that effort, so, you know, my suggestion is that you would allow them to make a conditional donation, and if you're not prepared to accept it on that basis, then you don't accept it.
I have another question, Chris. The musicals are not in the budget this year. If people fundraise, let's say for the musicals, and we have a very talented community, and they want to volunteer there trying to be the director, to be the choreographer and stuff, how do we handle that?
Well, you got a couple issues. The answer to the first question, I think, is can fundraising take place for something like a musical? I'd say yes. I don't, you know, in theory, I don't see why you couldn't do it. The second question that you pose is more of a labor issue and a legal issue, which is if the work of the director and some of the other positions associated with musical choreography, or whatever it is that, and typically some of those positions are in the teacher's contract
Right, they get
as
stipends
a
for it.
stipends. You're not permitted under the Taylor law, without negotiating with that association, of giving that work to somebody else like a volunteer. It would be considered to be improper practice under the Taylor law, so you don't have the right to have volunteers do the work for free in lieu of paying persons the stipend that's set forth in the teacher's contract, if that's an event that's already listed in the contract, which most of the time it is.
So
Most of the
if it is a
No.
staff member who would normally do it, who was offering to volunteer, does that make it different?
If the associate, again, the work is owned by the association, not by the individual employee, their association would have to sign off on it. It's
Okay.
not the individual teacher. The association is the bargaining agent for all of the individual teachers in their teaching capacity when they perform extracurricular work.
I assume the same thing holds true for clericals and, you know, I'm thinking of, I was asked the question yesterday about the play, for example, if you know, right now, we very often use clerical people to collect the tickets or to stand at the door and hand out, handing out programs they don't do, but they take the tickets or they do whatever else.
Is this overtime stuff?
I assume they get a flat, some kind of, I don't know if it's per hour, I don't know how it works, but you're saying the same thing is true.
Well, I'm not sure about this, the example you gave, because what I'm talking about is a situation where there's a particular stipend in the contract, like
Right.
the teacher's contract for
Right.
choreographer, for
Right.
Right,
band
there is.
director,
Right,
et
I
cetera,
understand
that
that,
you can't
Coaches.
subcontract that without having
okay.
negotiation with the union. But something like clerical work, I mean, there's no
We have-
stipend in your clerical contract for working, doing things outside, so I don't know that the same principle would apply.
Okay.
You know, I
Okay.
think that you could take,
If it doesn't, let's assume that it doesn't. Our policy says that if you have volunteers in your school building, they are subject to the screening procedures
right,
and blah, blah, blah.
fingerprints and et cetera.
And so then if we were able to use parent volunteers, they would have to be fingerprinted and,
Yes.
and they would have, and at their expense?
Yes.
I have a question about sports. Since we won't have middle school sports, I'm assuming we won't have coaches for middle school sports. If there's fundraising that happens for that, is it the same thing that we were just talking about with the musicals? Because would we be having volunteers as our coaches?
No,
Or would we
no,
be
no.
hiring coaches?
You would be paying the stipend that's reflected in your collective bargaining agreement for the 7th and 8th grade football team. There's a stipend associated for a head coach, I don't know if there's an assistant coach, you gotta pay that. Unless your association negotiates with you and says you don't, you pay a reduced price, but you gotta pay it. You can't just say, oh, you know what, we're gonna get a volunteer to be the football coach, it's gonna make it easier for the community members to
That's
raise
what I was
enough
wondering.
money. Unfortunately, that's not an option that you have, again, unless you bargain with the teachers association and they're gonna give up that claim, which I don't know any teachers association is prepared to do that.
The one thing that I've heard about from many people is that they're concerned about rivalries between the sports people and the arts people or whatever. But it sounds like if you have different groups fundraising for the things that they're interested in, that it's gonna mediate that a bit, because it's not the board's decision, it's how much money can these groups raise for their particular programs.
Correct.
Well, I think, look, can I, do you mind if I?
Not at all.
That's okay. I think the concern is, and I was just talking to somebody who has a business in another community, has a restaurant, and they're hit by everybody for donations.
The competition
So
will
the
be fundraising.
competition will
Right.
be
Yes.
among the groups to hit up all the businesses. There will be people, everybody will want to have car washes. They will want them in the same place. They will want them on similar weekends when the weather is
Yeah.
the best, or when they have access to the largest number of people. I think that's the kind of competition that they're talking about. I mean, just the same as, you know, we have always had mediation as far as the use of our fields is concerned. It's the same thing, you have community groups all wanting the fields at different times. Somebody has to play Solomon and, you know, you can have it, you can't. So somebody would have to, I think that's what they're talking about,
Yeah.
is,
That's what I would.
that kind of competition, that everybody's gonna be going to the same well for donations, and,
And I think what we, if particular groups wanna take the lead on that, I think it would be helpful for those groups to talk to similar groups in other communities that have already done it. I mentioned Seaford,
That's
Montauk, Plain Edge, and there's contact people in each of those districts. So they have some history and experience on what works, what doesn't work, what
Right.
makes money, what doesn't make money. So, you know, that may be something that those groups would want to consider, and we can help give them contact information, so it would help them with the plan.
In terms of, for instance, Mary Jo brought up the idea that, you know, some community groups, let's just use a car wash, for example, may want to use the same location. Let's say it was one of our fields. How do we work on a calendar for that, Christina?
it's like city.
Oh, okay, because that's like,
That is
That is
why
huge.
we might use, if we can get the Baldwin Foundation
Yes.
to do that, we could make them in charge of.
and it's sort of like an umbrella that would help funnel all of these things, because that seems like an enormous job.
But we would still have to schedule.
I was gonna say, we still have to do it.
And not only that, you're gonna have 5 or 6 organizations going to one, which is the Baldwin, you know.
Well, my understanding, if money was funneled through a foundation, like the Baldwin Foundation, can each fundraising group maintain their own account within that foundation? Like, you wouldn't commingle the funds.
I'm not sure how that works in terms
Okay.
of the money piece.
We'd have to find out from the
Yeah.
BF, or the groups would have to find out from the BFE how that works.
Yes.
How they would account for it, okay, they would have to explore that with their
Right.
accountants and auditors. Once the money comes over to us, all of this would start with the organization sending the superintendent and the board a letter expressing an intent to raise funds for whatever, and this is the target in terms of what they plan on raising. Let's say it's $40,000. Then, once we receive that letter, then all of you would have to discuss it. And then, assuming you would approve it, then we would contact that organization and say, yes, the board is conceptually comfortable with this, then kind of like give them the go-ahead to start the process. But then down the road, once the $40,000, say, comes over to the district, as Chris indicated before, if the letter specifically says it's gotta be used for this, that's what we have to use it for. And Chris had covered earlier all the legal aspects of this. There's a tremendous amount of accounting aspects of this, because all of our auditors, as well as the state controller, will be looking at it in terms of the way the district accounts for the funds.
Now, have anyone spoken to the Baldwin Foundation?
Yes, there has been some conversation with the foundation. I'm sorry, I don't wanna put anybody on the spot. We have a couple
Are
of
they
members of the
willing to do it?
foundation here, that's why I think we have to
Are you willing
have,
to agree
I
to
think
it?
we have to have a conversation with the foundation. I see members of the foundation here. And I think that we would have to have that conversation with them to see if they are willing to, for their membership to vote and agree to, work with us and work with the community groups.
There's one point I just want to make about sports and raising money. There's another principle of law that says there's no such thing as pay to play. And what that means is that, you know, sometimes you see a community organization in an effort to kind of streamline how it's gonna raise money, will say, okay, we have these sports programs, we're gonna have this, 300 slots for kids in this season. Each of those families of those 300 kids has to contribute $100, just sort out a number. And if they don't contribute, then they can't play. No, that is not permitted. There's no such thing as pay to play. So you can't do that.
How can the community members find out specifically the cost of each program they might be interested in fundraising?
Well, your athletic director should have, in consultation with the business office, be able to calculate the cost per season, what the fall cost is, what the winter 1, winter 2, and spring. You can able to calculate what those costs are. Typically, the major cost is the coach, and then transportation, there's reception fees. But yes, we can navigate that.
Okay,
Right,
good.
am I right?
Yeah, as well as the benefits on the salary or the stipend.
What about insurance? Does that come into play at all in insurance for
Liability,
liability?
We
I-
carry it.
Yeah, captain regardless, so you have your liability insurance through nicer policies. I don't think that's gonna change whether or not you have it.
Okay, good.
No.
I was reading about Wantagh, and they broke all the records on Long Island for fundraising, $650,000, which is a lot. And they got some from elected officials, and not a lot, but it was, UK, a nice chunk, piece of change. Are there any limits or laws that you know surrounding getting money from officials, from elected officials?
I'm not aware of any edges.
No, I mean, a local legislator certainly could somehow commandeer
Fine.
$100,000 and use it as a target grant for general purpose, or a target grant for an art program, or a music program, or a sports program, or a combination of all three.
Yeah.
I have a question about, let's say a group does not make their goal and they're $10,000 away. And a donation is made by, let's just say, an elected official, and their donation goes in, they don't earmark it, it's general. So now, does the board have the right to say, you know what, they're $10,000 short?
We got 10,000 over here, we're gonna use that 10,000, you're 40, we're now gonna have a
Right.
sports program, sure. You do that, as long as you have all the money for the program before the season starts.
I would want to have to make that
I know,
decision.
I'm just wondering if it's an option.
It's
You
an
can
option.
have
Might
it, you
not be
can't.
the best option, yeah. Okay,
Usually-
but it
usually
would be a
when-
problem.
Usually when you get a donation from an elected official, it is bulleted aid,
Yeah.
and it doesn't come generally like that.
They
It's
want their
for a
name on it,
specific thing.
yeah.
Okay,
They will want their name,
Yeah.
thanks to
yeah.
Jon Snow.
Also, the other question I had, my daughters want to do a fundraiser, they want to do a lemonade sale. So let's say they make like $7 or something, can that go into the pool? I mean, if they're unaffiliated, they're just doing it on their own?
Well, anybody can donate,
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
any amount of money to the district for, people donate computers and things of property, and it could be $5 or $10 and
Okay.
$15. Or they could give that money to whatever
Some
community
group
group.
that's doing it.
Right, and that's typically, that's why it has to be organized, it's an organization that they need to do. And again, I think by contacting folks like Nuanto, who did a very good job, and get a plan from them in terms of how they did it, what kind of communication they used, what worked or doesn't work, I think that would be critical. Especially if you're looking at the fall sports
Yeah,
season,
right.
which is not a whole lot of time.
No.
But the only thing, we do have a policy, and obviously the lemonade stand is not gonna be a problem, but you can't, where we specifically do not allow door-to-door fundraising, for
Oh, we
instance,
don't?
by students.
No, we
No,
don't.
That's
door-to-door
our,
fundraising
in our
by
policy,
students.
Not by
students may not engage in door-to-door fundraising and may not sell chances or raffle tickets.
Okay.
You know, there are pretty specific guidelines, and I'm sure we mirror the state in the guidelines we have. You also, there's a bunch of things here that are not allowed.
That probably applies to a situation where our kids, on behalf of like a sports team, et cetera, where we are involved in the fundraising, we can't have the kids go door to door because there's certain dangers associated with getting by cars and bad people out there. But we don't have any control on the outside if an organization is having students go door to door. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm just saying we don't control that.
Okay,
It's only a
thank you.
situation where
Okay.
we're kind of controlling the activity that we cannot permit.
Okay.
And because really this happens all the time, I mean, kids are always popping up at my door, buy an ice cream. It's like-
Otherwise we never have a Girl Scout.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so that's actually a
There's
good
a different
point.
distinction.
Very good point. And
Okay.
the other thing while we're at it is the use of school mail, backpacks for fundraising information. Can the boosters send something home in every kid's backpack?
Well, I think it would depend what practice you currently have in terms of the ability for outside groups to use your backpacks for conveying information. You have to take a look at what you've done in the past, what you haven't done in the past. One of the things you want to be concerned about is when you allow certain groups to use backpacks for various purposes, and they could be great purposes like fundraising. Now what happens when you have a group that's not such a good group? Now they want to use your backpacks, and you say yes to one. So it's a little dicey, but we have to take a look at it and see what your history has been.
And typically, we have allowed it for groups that are not for-profit groups. And the groups that do send things home, the not-for-profits, PTA, other
Okay.
groups like that, they supply the paper and
Oh, yeah,
everything.
we can't-
We don't do
We
anything.
don't do anything, we don't
No.
supply any of that paper or anything that has a monetary value, but if that's your practice, you allow non-for-profits, you could probably do the same thing.
I would just mention, just for purposes of the audience, our policy requires that if a group wants access, they have to apply to the superintendent. You know, it's not a given,
Right.
you would have to, you know, make application and.
You know, like the Girl
make a
Scouts,
decision.
the Boy Scouts, the Baldwin Bombers, they have to get approval first.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's been a common practice.
Yeah.
Groups do that all the time.
I didn't know for all these years when they hit my desk, I should be giving it to you.
And actually, they usually hit my desk first and then go to you.
Who knew?
I don't know where you're gonna send them.
Are there any other questions by the board? If not, then.
I'm sure the community will have things
I
that I
was-
needed to thought of.
Yeah, I was gonna say, why don't we open the floor? There's no podium here, so maybe stand up, state your name. Okay.
Lori Fitzpatrick, 2284 Rockland Avenue. I have a question about the calendar. We spoke briefly with Mary Jo last night about like the school calendar. There were certain things, the musical is on it, sports night is on it. Are those still maybe tentative dates that just won't physically be on the calendar when it comes out in August? So are those things maybe, let's keep sports night on or the musical on in case the fundraising comes through?
I
So-
think we could keep those times blocked out. Christina's the one that really works with the calendar from that standpoint, but there's probably no reason, and correct me if I'm wrong, that those dates can't be tentatively blocked.
And keep an internal copy and, make that available to all the groups and we know that PTA will have the calendars right now, but, make sure that everyone has the calendar as an internal document and the one that'll go out won't have the dates on there,
It'll just be blank.
right? And then for the high school musical, just as what happened this year with the storm, we needed to find an alternate date for that in the spring. So being that that's a big expense, we could also maybe find an alternative date for the high school musical in the spring, just in case it'll be too compressed for the fall.
Thank you.
Yes, in the back.
Hello everyone, Elisa Kirshner again. So a few questions I actually have. One is, I understand you're saying raising for the entire season. However, and because of the boy-girl thing, however, could it be you're fundraising for boys and girls lacrosse instead of the actual season?
Well, there's only been one Commissioner of Education decision on it, and in that decision, the Commissioner talks about if you're gonna have sports, you need the entire season. So I have a real question about whether or not that can be done or not, just based upon the existing law that talks about you need the entire season or nothing at all.
Is there a way to look into that?
Well, we could speculate, but there is no, the only authority out there talks about the entire season.
I mean, my whole thinking is that you have, say, lacrosse versus yo-yo, you know, yo-yos are great, but you know, if you're raising for an entire season, that if you get parents that are all, and I'm just throwing lacrosse out there, field hockey, I mean,
The problem is, the reason I think the Commissioner of Education, when he tackled that issue, recognized the fact that if you accept partial donation for partial sports, then you're asking the board to accept a donation for lacrosse, and you got the field hockey team and the other team, they're left out and they're unhappy. They're very unhappy, and those parents are very unhappy, and those kids are unhappy. So you're being asked to choose essentially, and you know, someone's gonna play and somebody's not, and that puts a lot of people in a very difficult position. I think that's why the Commissioner, in his decision on it, talked about having an entire season. So I don't think we would be comfortable with a partial season and not include all the sports, because who do you take and who do you don't? You know, lacrosse is important for other people, well, field hockey is important for others, and football is important for others, and how do you pick and choose?
Because for instance, those are 3 different
Commissioner's
seasons that you
decision,
spoke
we
about.
couldn't do that.
Well, he doesn't say you can't, but I think the implication from that is that there's things that are impermissible about having, picking and choosing which sport you're gonna have in that scenario. Just wouldn't be comfortable telling you
It's
that.
more the spirit of the,
It's not consistent with the spirit of that decision.
So theoretically, a parent of the sport that wasn't being supported could challenge the district's decision
Correct.
to support only
Certain sports.
certain sports and not others.
Right.
So it would open us to litigation, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
I understand what you
I
mean.
would advise you to do that.
Yeah, that's,
I think you gotta accept the fact that it's gonna have to be the whole season, whether it's fall, winter 2, or if you have winter 2 and spring, or it's not gonna exist.
Okay, and then the fundraising that you do make for the fall season per se, if you do not raise enough money, you guys are throwing out 40, 50,000, if you only raise 40 of the 50,000, can you hold on to that till the next fall season?
Well, that's what I was asking
You just wouldn't donate it. That organization would hold on to that money in some sort of account until you.
You would
hold
hold
on to it.
yes.
And you don't donate it to us, because then it's specific what you have to donate it for. That's why I was asking that question, for that very reason. So you keep it in an account, and then you hold it, and when you have enough money, then you donate it specific for what you need.
And that might be the winter season.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
More
what-
questions left. So for the whole volunteering, and I know how you said the whole negotiation with the stipends and all this, not for nothing, is there a way to renegotiate? Because I will volunteer my ass off to have middle school sports brought back again. I mean, I will coach, I will get my husband, I mean, I don't even have a middle schooler because the city program's lost. I mean, obviously, negotiations went awry. We can't afford to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in stipends if we don't have it.
I know it's very emotional and it's very difficult, believe me, we are all feeling it, the board, the community, everybody. You know, it's a very tough thing, but we have to go by the rules, we have to play by the rules, and it's unfortunate, but it is something that we have to do, and these are the contracts that our teachers have, and we have to deal with that. That's why I was asking the question if we could have volunteers, because I know community members would.
And trust me, if we had the money, they deserve $1 billion. Obviously, we don't. So is it a community input that we could be a part of during negotiations? And yes, it was wonderful that they took a price freeze last year. Are they possibly doing the same this year?
I think we are always in negotiations with all of our bargaining groups. I think the answer really is, we can't count on that. There's no way to predict how that would go. So unfortunately, we have to use the contract language that is currently in place. Because even if we said we would try to work with the bargaining, we can't guarantee that. And you don't have the time
Oh,
to
definitely.
wait for that. So we have to raise the money under the guidelines of the current contract.
But when is the current contract up? So then when the stipends and.
It's been up. It's been up.
But just so that you don't leave the wrong impression out there, stipends, and there's a lot of anxiety associated with this, no question about it, but stipends represent the smallest portion of the costs here.
Oh, I know, it's
It's
just.
really transportation and officials' fees and, fees to belong to Section 8. The stipends are
Is
actually
this
the
much?
smallest
That's
piece of it, so
actually-
it's not hundreds of thousands of
There's a
dollars
dollar
of
sign
stipends.
next to it, so
Right.
in the whole picture for anything, allocated with the dollar sign next to it, unfortunately, it's anything and everything, especially when you have volunteers following right behind to just say, hey, work for free. And then lastly, I was here about grandfathering the 3rd to 4th grade instruments, and I got a call today stating that the summer program, I could be refunded because if I didn't have my child for 4th grade instruments because it's just a 5th grade thing. A, who makes that decision if the 5th graders, if, right now, it's only 5th grade instrumental
Right.
will be offered. However, I presented, there be a way that it changes, that the children that started this year in 3rd grade, could they please be grandfathered in for 4th grade? Who
And what were
makes-
you saying, you got notified what?
So I got a call today stating if I would like a refund from the arts program for the summer music, the 3-week music program,
Okay.
because since it's not going to be offered for the 4th grades next year. However, I was wondering who, and they pointed that either the board or Mr. Mapes himself makes the decision about the whole grandfathering thing, if that's a definite done deal, or is it something, is it the new board that will make that decision? Is it this board? Who makes
Actually,
it?
there is no grandfathering, because now the district has a music program that starts in 5th grade.
So you've already made that
Is
decision?
it
Whereas
that,
last week when I asked about it, you guys all seemed like, oh yeah, we'll look into it.
is it that the
We did
staff
say that.
has already been reduced?
The staff has already been reduced. There's no staff
That's
for
part
that
of the
program.
budget, there is no staff for that, that was my
And
understanding.
the program has been reformulated based on,
Yeah.
the budget.
So then why wasn't I told that last week at the same budget meeting that we just had here in June?
Well, we waited until after last night's vote, because if last night's vote had gone down, then, why do it twice if last night's vote had gone down?
But it's still
The
gone.
whole
It'll be
program
gone
would-
even worse.
But then it would have been,
Yeah,
Instead of it being hope of it being grandfathered, it's just now gone.
yeah.
So could I get an outside music store to volunteer teachers to teach?
No, because that's part of the contract.
Those are stipends in the contract, absent agreement by Teachers Association, then we could not unilaterally bring in volunteers without violating this limits the tail law.
What
But
about
it
for-
really isn't a stipend. These are music teachers that are gonna be laid off, that would have been teaching these lessons. So if you bring in an outside music company, let's say, that'll do the lessons, you're not giving them stipends. They're,
You're
those
violating-
teachers don't exist anymore.
No, but you are violating the
but
contract.
you're taking
because
the
Still
you're
job
are.
of a high, of an
Right.
employee.
That work is in the contract,
Right.
it's stipend, it's not based on individuals who've done it, it's based on the position.
So is there a way that I could still use the building as a volunteer?
I don't know what you mean.
Use it
For
for
what?
what purpose?
From 3 to 4 on Wednesdays, I'm gonna have music lessons.
Put in for it.
You as a volunteer.
I really
I
don't
mean, we
know.
would have to, I think we would have to see a proposal and determine whether it violates any labor agreements and go through that process.
So how would I go about that?
You could, well, actually, it depends how quickly you do it, but you'd either send it to me or Mr. Scannell.
But a written proposal,
written
so that we
proposal.
could determine, you know,
What you're
the
suggesting,
legal-
when, what would it be, number of kids would be involved, and we'd take a look at it.
So I could do that under any grounds of art, music, after school activities?
We can submit the proposal, we'd have to take a look at how
No,
it's supposed to
exactly,
contract.
but that's, if I want any 3 to 4 after school with whatever, I could just
Yeah.
make a proposal and then you.
This
go
is
through it.
interesting, because I remember when my daughter was she's in middle school now, but when she was at Brookside in kindergarten and I think first grade also, they had like an outside chess group, and they also had an outside Spanish
Yeah.
learning all
It's
year
the same
round.
thing, I don't see why it would be.
Yeah.
So
This
I'm
is
wondering
what I'm
if this
hoping
is
for.
similar to what you're saying,
I
and
want arts, I want music,
Okay,
I
wait.
want.
Right.
those students though, I think had to pay, so I'm wondering about that, like,
That was on a club basis, that was not
Yes.
part of it.
That was on a
But we would,
club.
we would have to carefully.
Right, a club, that's what she's saying, right?
Right.
An after-school
Okay.
club that offers everything that unfortunately has been taken away.
so
I will
let's,
have-
No, well, be careful with that, you can't offer everything that's been taken away, because then you're violating the contract, because you
As activity.
you have to
it's-
structure it in such a way that it might be a club. You'd have to create the structure, we would have to take a look at it in light of our labor agreements and see what kind of grounds we're on.
Okay, and you're having normal hours through this week and the next couple weeks at the district. Thank you very much.
yes, please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Michelle Wright. I'm from Baldwin Shoppers Card. We are a new company. I would like to introduce our company as a fundraising tool for the district. We've attended the Baldwin Civic Association meeting, the Baldwin Chamber of Commerce meeting. The card, what it does is when you go to participating merchants in the community, if you show the card, they offer you discounts. We do have a few stores that are participating. On our website, we even show even the beneficiaries, whenever a person purchases a card, a portion of those funds go to whichever organization or school or club that they choose for a portion of that membership fee to go to. So I just wanted to introduce the Baldwin Shoppers Card. And I was listening also for the fall sports. If we can, get involved with that, we would love for our cards to be used as a fundraising tool. There is no fee. It's just a portion of that membership fee going back to the schools. We're just looking for our operational costs because, there is a cost associated with the cards, and just getting the word out. Okay?
Okay.
And I
Thank you.
got-
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, we should definitely maybe talk to some people after the meeting.
Sure.
I don't know how organized everybody is yet,
Okay.
but I know everybody's passionate and interested, so I have a feeling that if people aren't completely organized yet, they will be very soon. So,
Great. Okay,
Thank
thank you.
Hi, my name is Bob McIntyre. Just a few, I wanted to clarify a couple of things. You said that, say for the full sports, you have 3 different sports or whatever it might be, right? And you said you have to fundraise for all of the sports to get all of the, say, 3 sports presented to the kids. So if the parents, pick a sport A, put all their efforts into fundraising and the other 2 sports, the parents don't participate and don't help raise funds, then all 3 sports won't exist. Is that
Correct.
my understanding?
Correct.
That's correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you also said there's a stipend associated with the contract for the school teachers to provide the coaching, right? Now, is this because that it has to be on school property, or could these sporting events take place at Baldwin Park?
No, it's a function of that, it's a Baldwin school program.
But the
That
Baldwin
doesn't make-
School District isn't providing for it anymore, so how can they call it a Baldwin School Program?
Well, it's gonna be an interscholastic sport, it's gonna be a Baldwin school team. And then any outside group who wants to have its own sports program, they can, but if it's gonna be a Baldwin School District lacrosse team, then we have an obligation under the tail law, if we have a stipend associated with that in the teacher's contract, we can't just unilaterally accept volunteers to coach that particular Baldwin school team. We're just not permitted legally to do it.
Even if it's not on the property.
Even if
It's
not on
called the
property.
Baldwin, so we could be the Friends of Baldwin Football and have their own team.
If it's part
Be a
of
football.
a Baldwin School District program, we can't do it.
And if it was the Friends of Baldwin football or something like that, it would not be part of section.
Yeah, it would be part of Section 8.
What is Section 8? I might have missed that earlier.
Section 8 is the organization in Nassau County that governs interscholastic sports. That's the section that is the ruling body over Nassau County sports, coordinates the schedules, the referees, facilitates the games and discipline and everything involved with interscholastic activities is coordinated through a section, and that's Section 8 in Nassau County.
So you could do that, but you couldn't say it's Baldwin preschool.
But they wouldn't be.
They might not
They
be able
would-
to.
they would- they would play.
Would you get into the league as an outside Baldwin football? Would they let you in the league?
No.
We're gonna play.
So if you don't raise up enough money to put the kids into sports, all three sports, there's no sports anyway. So you go into this, into the winter.
Not
And then-
really, you go into it as
But you said they were
passionate,
gonna earmark money, but you're not earmarking money, right?
No, we already marked the money.
yes,
If
for,
there's $50,000 for a sports program, if you can donate 50,000, we'll have that sports program.
Till lacrosse. But they have to all.
For the fall,
All programs.
We can't just,
One
we
sport.
can't just
Right.
earmark lacrosse as one program.
But can you negotiate the bus fees? Like, as a parent, I pick up my daughter and bring her to, I pick her up, I have to tell them to drive to the sporting event. Do you have to have a buses? You said that was a major expense.
Isn't there something, there's a law about?
Yeah,
Yes.
there's a law in place that we have to,
I mean, I would write a note to the bus driver and say, I'm taking her home.
unfortunately,
Okay.
we have to provide transportation to sports programs.
And that's a law, right?
Yes, it's a lot.
yeah.
Even though there's no consideration in the law when the budget doesn't get passed?
No, it doesn't matter.
Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Dan?
Hi, I came a little late. Did anybody mention or bring up One Tour SOS a couple of years back?
Yes.
Yes, we did.
So we spoke about doing things in phases, 501c3, everything's, okay, great.
Not really, Richard, we didn't go into that.
We didn't get that far.
What we talked about was Wanto is an example of a very successful community organization that raised a significant amount of money a couple of years ago so that they could have full complement of their sports program. And they were organized and they did a terrific job in raising money. And I suggested that's a type of group that an organization should contact to get some information about how to do it and prioritize and type of activities, et cetera.
We
As a
also
teacher-
talked about the Baldwin Foundation of Education, who has their own 501c.
Receive designation that it might be a conduit.
And
They
it
have
will-
to, they have to amend their mission statement though, in regards to the
and it'll be a
fundraising.
faster process than everybody
Most
trying to
certainly.
get their own.
Most certainly. Mrs. Meany, who is a Steele School teacher, she actually is a resident of Wantagh, so I had a chat with her. And she was involved with her children, and they fundraised their blank off. And they did it in phases, so
Right.
starting now, late June, early July, you're fundraising for the fall, obviously. They raised $650,000, but the issue was a lot of the politicians got involved and raised approximately 100, or gave 125,000 of that amount. Was that covered?
Yes.
I'll sit down.
Thank you, Mr. Danvers.
Mary Jane Kearns. How quickly is can the administration provide the amounts that are necessary for each fall sports, winter sports, spring sports, musical, and anything that has been bandied about in terms of what people want?
That can be turned around very quickly, like last year.
Like tomorrow?
Tomorrow?
Like
Or the
tomorrow.
next day?
By the end of the week.
Can you put
Okay.
it on the
Day after
website?
tomorrow?
Can it go up on the website?
Sure.
Oh, that's a good idea.
You know, we need to get the information out to as many people as quickly as
Do you think
possible.
we could get it on the website by
Well,
the
yeah,
end of the
but
week?
it'll take a couple of days to put it together.
Right,
Yeah.
and then
But
post it on the
you
website.
should know because you've been cutting the programs, so you should know what the costs are.
You do know.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Shaw?
The Baldwin Foundation for Education was started over 20 years ago at the instigation of the then Superintendent of Schools, Gene Lanzaro. And it was established to assist the programs and facilities of the Baldwin Union Free School District.
a lot of donations come in to the Foundation for Education, just to the Foundation for Education. Some of them come for a specific purpose, like a memorial scholarship. And so the foundation has different accounts. This idea of the way funds were raised traditionally, you know, of a cigar box, or maybe the president of a club goes down and gets a checking account and uses their own social security number, is, in my opinion, completely inappropriate for the kind of money we're talking about raising. So this week, the foundation had last week, the foundation had its regular board meeting, and this was discussed, and it was agreed to form a committee to explore a dialogue with the district about how we can facilitate that. And I think the overall idea would be that a group that met the criteria that was agreed to by the board and the foundation could form and get a sub-bank account for that, for that purpose, be it for sports night or the musical, fall sports, that kind of stuff. And, that we're ready to do that. We're ready to have that conversation with